Well, good evening everybody, and welcome to another one of our meetings. We've got a few people signing in. Let me just have a look from the top. We've got Jill this evening. Good evening, Jill. We've got Sue. Good evening. Good evening. Lovely evening now. Yes, it is, Sue. I must admit it's quite a nice evening now after all the rain that we've had. I hope you've all been dry during the day. So and we've got Diva's popped in, so good evening, Diva. And Tony, good evening to you, Tony. I hope that you've not sort of got yourself too worked up about the information that you may be reading at the moment. So we'll not say no more about that. Good evening, Neil. Welcome to young Neil. Graham H. Yeah, you are. You're very late, Graham H. It's not a very good start for you. You're about halfway down. So, who else? Alan. Good evening, Alan. Welcome to you. Jim. Hi, Jim. Another one just popped in. Bob. Good evening, young man. I shouldn't think you've been out sat in many edge bottoms today, Bob. Not a good day for sitting in edge bottoms. Who else have we got? Anyway, we can get that. Thank you, Neil. Hi, Viv. Yeah, just spotted you there, Viv. So welcome to Viv this evening. Hope you're well and getting on even better with that camera now. It's always a bit daunting getting a new camera, but I'm sure that you're getting to grips with it now. So it is a bit difficult. Good evening, Peter. Hi, Peter. And Richard. Thank you very much for the pictures today, Richard. They were greatly appreciated. They're all in there ready for the talk in a fortnight's time. Caroline, welcome to Caroline. That's Caroline O and Caroline S, both of you, and Dave. Good evening to you all. Who else have we got here? I had to hand deliver a cheque first, GD. Oh, right, very good, thank you. That's very appreciated. And that's it, we're down to the bottom of the list. So I'm sure there'll be one or two more popping in. If you haven't done already, do remember to like the channel this evening, and make sure that if you haven't subscribed, make sure that you subscribe. We've got Michael popped in, so that's Michael Hughes. So good evening, Michael. Welcome to you. I hope you're well and managed to keep dry today. So it certainly has been a bit of a change for us. Even though we've had one or two dull days, we're still not used to a lot of rain of recent, so it does make quite a bit of difference. So yes, Viv, I've just seen your comment there, it just popped up, and I'm pleased that you're liking the camera. You'll certainly like the weight of it. It's not particularly heavy, that's one thing for you. So yeah, just have a quick slurp. Another one just popped in there. Good evening, Ray. It's good to see you all again at this evening's what can I call it? Meeting. Let's just call it a meeting. It's nothing else other than, is it? So what we've got this evening, as you all know, is Brian. So we'll be showing you Brian in a few minutes. Anybody who's watching, yes, the Dunholm Camera Club screen with the logos etc. on is still showing, so no concerns. As long as you can hear me, we're here. So it certainly is going to be a good evening this evening. We've got quite a bit to talk about, and don't forget, as soon as you think of a question for Brian, make sure that you drop it down in the chat, so that we can ask the questions, or I will ask the questions for you on your behalf to Brian. So another one just popped in. Good evening, Doreen. Hope you've had a good early walk this evening. No doubt you've been laid in it's a bit wet to be laying down in fields today, isn't it? So, well, we're up to 24 now. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I can't remember whether I said good evening to Mark. Mark's just popped up again, so no, I think it was other people. So good evening, Mark. And also Michael Hudston. Hi, Mike. Pleased you got to us, and I hope you'll be able to spend a little bit more time with us this evening, and I hope you aren't suffering too badly with a bad head this week. So you stay safe and well, all of you. Right, I'm just going to switch over the screen. Whilst I'm talking, you will see Brian, because we're using a different system this week. Brian will talk to you once I've done the notices, and then Brian will switch his screen over and give you a rundown of whatever he's speaking. Now, I did put down that it was a talk by Brian, because the exact content we are leaving up to Brian this evening. So we'll do the big reveal, and I'll do the notices. So here goes. Big drum rolls, everybody, for revealing Brian. So there he is, the young man himself, and there's me in the bottom corner even, so you can see both of us. So right, we're at 1859, so I'm going to do the notices. There's only a couple of little ones, so don't forget we're getting into the last couple of days for the favourite sixes. That is your 6 images, your favourite 6 images. Doesn't have to be anything special. All it needs to be is 6 images of your choice. Give us a little short sentence about them, and then I can just relay that out when I show you pictures to the members in a fortnight's time. All they need to be is just JPEGs, goodish size, 1 megabyte, 2 megabytes, whatever you send through, but not really smaller than 1 megabyte. So that's the favourite sixes. The other one is they want to be in, by the way, for Sunday night. So by midnight Sunday night, make sure that you get your sixes in. Also, Bob's, our chairman, his monthly competition, make sure that you get those in, the entries into Dropbox, which I do believe off the top of my head is Clouds, etc. this month, but it is on the folder in Dropbox. So I'm just going to check the notes, what's coming up on the chat. Doreen, right, Gromett is watching, so welcome, Gromett. Don't know whether Jan's with us this week, but welcome to you all. Paul's just popped in as well, so we've got 1 or 2 good evenings to you, Brian. We've got members just wishing you all the best and looking forward to this, even though we don't know the content. So by the way, Brian, I was just thinking there's no pun intended there when I said good evening, Gromett, because one of the ladies who watches, her nickname's Gromett. So nothing to do with you, Brian, honest. So
it's okay. My son used to work with a guy called Wallace. So it was Wallace and Gromett Builders.
Right. Right, everybody. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Brian. Don't forget, make sure that you drop your message, not your messages, your questions in the chat there, and I shall ask Brian on your behalf the question that you're asking. So without further ado, I shall hand you over to Brian and I'll get rid of myself. So all over to you, Brian.
Hopefully I can get onto the right screen. That's the first thing.
Well, it's all new technology for us, so consequently everybody will listen and whatever.
Can you see my screen?
I can see you personally.
Can't see me, so I haven't shared my screen then, have
No,
I?
you've not shared your screen yet.
Go back and do that. Think.
Yeah.
Is that my entire screen? Yeah, it should be there.
That's showing me now.
And then...
That's it.
We okay at that now?
Yeah, and that's gone to your page of various.
That's my menu system.
That's it.
Lovely. Well, good evening, everybody. I know you can't answer back, but good evening. This is going to be interesting for me because I'm going to be talking to myself in a room here for quite a long time. I don't think it's a sign of madness, but you can never tell, can you? Anyway, we'll see how it goes. Hopefully you can hear what I'm saying. There's some funny noise coming through my headphones, I must admit. I'm sat here with a cup of tea in my casual gear, waiting for a go. So let's see how we start off. I was asked to talk about monochrome photography tonight. I'm not a monochrome specialist. In fact, I didn't have a lot to do with it until about 2014 when I entered the monochrome competition for the Photographer of the Year. Interestingly enough, I got disqualified, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. Anyway, let's have a look at what we've got here. So monochrome photography. I'm going to sort of go through these one at a time. I'm first of all going to explain what monochrome is, because there seems to be a little bit of confusion about that. So I'll explain to you what that is first of all. Then I'll suggest why you should shoot in monochrome, for what reasons in a picture you're looking for. What actually works in monochrome, that's my opinion of course, not necessarily anybody else's, and how to set up your camera for taking monochrome images. Because I think it's important to get the idea of setting your camera up specifically to go out and take monochrome. There's no real advantage to going out and taking some shots, and I think the old adage used to be, it doesn't work in colour, I'll try it in monochrome. That is definitely not the way to go forward. The answer is to go out with the intention of shooting monochrome images, and you will come back with a much better acceptable quantity of images. The other thing is to talk a little bit about the software that's available to process your images, and then finally to talk a little bit about printing images. Right, so what is monochrome? Well, monochrome for most people is black and white, like this particular image here. Now, that is fine, but black and white, and what you really need as well is all of the tones from black to white and all the greys in between. And that's where it gets interesting, and it's the way the greys and blacks work together. So this image is definitely black and white, and it's got lots of greys in it, so it is a monochrome image. This is also a monochrome image. This one is toned. It's toned with the brown tone, the sepia toning, and the answer here is that it is actually black and white, but with sepia tones in between. So if you think of a sepia as a colour, if you start adding white to it, it gets paler and the tints eventually become white. If you start with the same colour and add black, eventually you'll go to black if you add enough. So it is black with a white top and bottom, but all of the tones are brown in between. It doesn't matter what colour you use. This is a selenium type tone on this one of blue. You can see we've still got white, we've still got black, but we've got lots of these blue tones in between. This is one that I tend to use to upset judges. It is blue. It actually was rather like that when I took it, to be quite honest with you. I just emphasised the blue. It's a Fenwick lighthouse. It was taken off the coast of Ireland, and the way the light fell on the mountains just generated this blue cast, which I thought worked very well. So I used that. The judges look at it and think, is it really monochrome? But the answer is yes, it is really a monochrome. So that's fine. This is the one that I came a cropper on. This is not monochrome. This is actually two colours. What I'll do is I'll try and just zoom in a bit for you. I think you might be able to see now that there's some sort of grey dots in amongst the brown dots. So there's a full range of grey, a full range of browns, and then the whites and the blacks. So it's not a single colour. It is actually two tones in there, and that's why it gets thrown out. In fact, it took David Gibbons to get a magnifying glass and actually examine it very, very closely before he actually disqualified it. But it was disqualified because it was not truly monochrome. Shame, really, because it was in the last few of the competition. Anyway, that one is monochrome. This one isn't really monochrome. Now, it's fairly close because I've used split toning on it, and the tones for the darks and the tones for the lights have been very similar. So you could probably just about get away with this one. But generally speaking, split toned images are definitely not going to pass the muster, so don't use those. So why shoot in monochrome? Well, monochrome has this ability to simplify an image. There was lots of muck on this car, actually. It was a brand new, well, a second-hand car my son was going to buy, and he took me over to Sheffield to have a look at it, and I decided I'd take some photographs while I was there. And it was quite grubby because it had been out in the rain. But if you then change your image to monochrome on this occasion, it simplifies it to a series of shapes and a bit of text, and that seems to work quite nicely for me. So I think the composition actually works on that one, and the simplification is something that you can use from monochrome. Another reason to use monochrome is when you've got some really strong shapes and strong lines, particularly if you've got the ability to go black, white. So if you look across at this middle height here, it's going from sort of mid-grey, whitish mid-grey, to a very dark grey, to a lighter grey, to a mid-grey, to a medium grey again, to another dark grey. And by going through that section, you're getting all sorts of different greys. You do need to have that sort of boundaries where it moves from one grey to another grey to get a good image. Obviously in the sky it's going to be more fluid movement between the colours, but it is nice to sort of get the tones grading through. So you want either straight lines and nice big strong colours, or you want to have nice flat grades. What I was saying before is about getting a full range of tones. If you look in this one, there's some very dark blacks in this bottom left-hand corner, up to some really bright whites over on this right-hand coastline. And then in the greys and the sky and the sort of tones here, there's lots of different tones in there. Virtually every tone of grey is in this image somewhere. And that kind of image really works well as long as you can get back. Most black and white images do actually need somewhere that is really black and somewhere that is really white or just about. The other thing that works quite nicely with black and white is graphic images. This image where the light is the main key on this one, light coming from up in that top right-handish corner, falling across the vaults that way, creating the shadow behind them and creating this nice three-dimensionality around here where we've got the brightness on one side, darkness on the other, and that's giving it a nice bit of 3D shape. And it's creating this graphic image, a circle on one side and then the line on the other side. And the relationship between the two seems to work really nicely. So graphic images also work quite well. Sometimes you can get an image to look far more dramatic by using black and white than you can if it's in colour. I have versions of this in colour and it's quite nice, but it is nowhere near as dramatic as having this really powerful sky, which is going from blacks in where the blue should be and whites up in the cloud here. And this building is a little bit yellowy, in fact, down here, but the grey seems to set off against quite well. And a really good strong shadow on this right-hand side here works quite nicely. So it's an interesting image. I think because of the shapes as well, that they're very much geometrical shapes, it seems to work quite well as well. So that's another thought.
On that one, Brian, on the last one,
Yeah, no
just
problem.
just out of my own thoughts, have you done additional work in the sky, or is that just a case of by changing it, that's how it came out?
I would suspect there's been some work done on it.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
I would think one of the things that you need to be looking at when you're tending to do monochrome images is to work on them first in colour and then sort of boost them a bit, probably over boost them because it changes to black and white more dramatically.
All right. Yep. Yeah. Just had a
Okay?
just had a question come in from Paul, one of our members as well.
Yeah.
It appears like quite a few of the images have a grainy quality to them. Is that an added film grain? Do monochrome images particularly accept the grain effect more readily?
Grade is quite acceptable. In the old days when we had film, we used to push the grain. That was the idea, wasn't it? We would
Yeah.
use 100 ISO and expose it at say 400 ISO, and then develop it for extra log in the tank, which would create the grain. So I think sort of grainy images will work. You've got to be a bit careful because sometimes the judge takes a disliking to it and calls it noise.
Yeah.
It's a bit. I personally like the grain in there, but they don't always do so. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Got another question just come in. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Graham, you know Graham because he's our treasurer. You like him.
Mhm.
Graham says quite a lot of noise on the Humber Bridge photo. Does Brian think that's okay, as it looked okay, but the following image by comparison was like a fine art image?
Shall I say that again?
So quite a lot of noise on the Humber Bridge photo. So
Yeah, I
does
brought it up.
Brian think that's okay as a look okay, but the following image, in other words the one after this, by comparison is like a fine art print?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's horses for courses. I mean, the image of the yacht on the lake would not suit grain at all, but a graphic image like the bridge does accept it, shall we say? I've got a feeling I might have used some other processing in there when I'm looking at it. There's some sort of light streaks coming down from the right here. Perhaps there's supposed to be this shadow created here. I'm not quite sure, but there's something funny just happening just there. So this might be something to do with the processing, which I am prone to do on occasions and push things just a tad,
Yeah, no,
just to make it more dramatic.
thank you very much indeed.
These here can generate more emotion, I think, sometimes using black and white as well. So I tried a couple of images here. I think these were taken when I went over to a photo shoot with Trusthorpe, and they took me in the local graveyard because that was where they met, and it was quite useful to go back there. We had a quick look around. So I think there's a certain amount of emotion comes out of these images. I think black and white helps that more. Again, I don't think this one is particularly grain on the cross on the right hand side. I think that's actually the lichen that's growing on it as well. So I think these are fairly well produced fairly standardly. So there's a bit of bright down here, and the gravestone one on the left hand side, probably a bit bright there, possibly pushed a little bit. More to do with what works rather than the quality of the image, by the way. I'm not putting myself out as being knowing what I'm doing in this game. I'm just trying to give ideas more than anything else, and sort of probably push you on to another stage, which is I think is important.
Yeah.
It's also good for generating atmosphere. I mean, the one on the bottom left is taken on Lake Garda. It was taken a long time ago, and I never processed it because I didn't have the capability to do so. But when I did, I found out there was mountains in the background, and it made a really stunning image. Got the three yachts there, so the sort of composition works as well. And the one on the Humber Brid on the right-hand side, okay, there's a bit of a heavy vignette across the top there. That's another characteristic that I'm prone to use with monochrome images to push the eye in. Because if you've got a very bright sky, you've got to do something with it. So I will probably use something like a fairly heavy vignette across the corners to push the viewer back into the image. It sort of focus the attention where you want them to look. So what works in monochrome? Well, documentary photographs work in monochrome. This one's at the Lincoln Grand Prix. I don't know which year it is. It's taken a while ago now, but it's a sort of photograph that would work well in a newspaper in the old days, isn't it? Except you probably wouldn't get that much definition in it as you have there. Good set of tones, and if you look again, though, so from the very white right through the greys. And it's concentrating because the dark that's around the outsides throughout here, it's concentrating the viewer into this area, possibly seeing this character on the right-hand side who's watching who's coming next, possibly watching for his son coming up or something like that. This is quite a good image to sort of show what it can do. Street photography tends to work in monochrome as well. This one was taken in Borough Market. I think there's a lot of look goes with street photography. I think the monochrome treatment on this definitely works because there was a lot of colour in it, and that simplifies it. But if you look at that girl's face, I am quite intrigued to know what she's seen. I know she's just about to take a bite out of that whatever it is she's got in her hand, but there's a guy on the right-hand side in front of this one who's stood here, down there, and there's somebody else here. Somewhere over here, she has definitely seen something which has grabbed her attention. I think I've timed it fairly well because we've got this spacing here, and so I think that sort of works. But street usually works with monochrome because, again, problem with street is lots of colourful distractions. So always worth a try with street. The only bad news is judges don't tend to think it's to street photography, which is a shame.
Yeah.
I don't think they recognise the skills involved.
Even the lady in the back has seen the same thing as the one in the front.
She's seen something, hasn't she? There's something over this side.
Yeah.
And I've no idea. I've got a horrible feeling that I actually took this in portrait mode and cropped it, which is interesting.
Possibly.
I know it's only using a compact camera, but it certainly works.
Yeah. Possibly some of the members are just wondering on that particular image. Does it looks to have got an effect on it. Has it got an effect?
Not particularly.
Right, yeah.
No, it's just pushing it. I tend to fairly heavily process images. I have sort of standard things that I do. With monochrome these days, I must admit I'm pulling back a bit on it. I started going to the monochrome group in about October time and looking at the work they do. This is a relatively modern approach to go for the very heavy stuff, but they tend to be a bit more traditional and go into lighter tones because they come from film photography more than digital, shall we say.
Right. We've got another question in, Brian, from Jill. Yep. She's just saying, are you using any HDR settings in the images or doing all of the processing yourself?
I do all the I don't use presets. I do all the processing myself, basically.
Right.
I might use preset as a basis to start with. I haven't used things like silver effects for quite a while now. I tend to do most of it by going into Lightroom, processing it. I then will probably throw it into monochrome in Lightroom and use the sliders there to pull the colours where I want them to get the tone right in the image. I then probably flip into Photoshop to edit any distractions out, and then come back and probably just do a bit of tweaking around the edges and things in Lightroom just to bring a bit more texture out or whatever. Tending to use texture rather than clarity more these days because you can use it heavier without destroying your image. So it's an interesting thought. But as I say, don't rely on me telling you the right way to do it because I'm a relative newcomer to monochrome.
Right. The other part of a question was, do you ever use HDR?
No,
No, no.
no. I've never used HDR. Oh, I'm lying. I did one shot for demonstration purposes, which was 5 shots, and I groomed it together for one, and that's about it. No, most of mine is done in camera and then post-processing from a single image.
Right, yeah.
And I don't. I do like some HDR, but I'm not a great believer in what was the original HDR, where everything was so over realistic, surreal. I think they called it at one stage.
Yeah, over the top.
I didn't particularly like that.
Yeah. Jill's just put, thanks Brian, she does like that sort of modern approach to processing of the street photography.
I didn't catch all that, Graham.
No, Jill's just put that she just thanked you and said she does like the modern approach and the processing of the street photography.
Okay. Thank you, Jill. Much appreciated. I mean, it's all to your own taste at the end of the day, but I think the thing that judges are really definitely looking for, as I say, is some area that is black, some area that is white, and plenty of tones in between, unless you're going for something a little bit simpler, which we might find out, and we've got some more in a minute. So let's just progress a bit further, see where we go on to next.
Yep. Okay,
landscapes. Landscapes do work in black and white, but I'm not sure that it's always the best thing to do. This is, I think, Lynn Padden in Llanberis area. Again, I think you do need a good sky, and I think we've got a fairly good sky here. It's verging on the burning out, and you need some sort of geographical things in. So you've got your lead in line from the left-hand side, which is taking you round to the building down there, and then across into the building. So there's a way of reading this image, which helps. But if you notice, I was talking about blacks and whites, as you progress across the hills, notice how the shades change to give it that shaping. And I think that is something that you're looking for in a monochrome image, particularly in landscapes. It's no good having this all very much of a mush. It's not going to work. You need something like this, which is really the shadow areas, and then the shadow on this side of the bush, the trees here, and the shadow down that valley there, that gully. So you need those sort of things to sort of get the differential, to give you the fact that it's recessing into the background. So I think that's something that's important. And again, if you look around the corners again, there is some sort of vignetting around here as well. And I think that works as well. Sometimes I wouldn't advise it doing every corner all the time. Sometimes that doesn't work or isn't necessary. Travel shots. So this is obviously Tower Bridge. Different kind of sky. A bit grainy this time, you might say. Yeah. It's, if you want to, you can always get rid of that grain if you don't like it in the sky. I mean, it's not particularly difficult, but I don't tend to worry too much. I think it adds to the textures and so on. Can contrast nicely with the bridge tones.
Would that have been brought in by the processing, or would that have been brought in by the higher ISO used at the time of taking?
I think this would have been taken at a very low ISO. It was bright sunshine, so it'll be in the processing, if anywhere.
Right. Yep. Yep.
Unfortunately, I don't keep a note of the way I process things, which is not particularly useful sometimes.
Do you mean you don't remember?
That's the one, yeah. Everything else I can find from Lightroom, but processing is a bit of a devil. Graphic architecture is something I quite like to do with monochrome as well. There's some greens in this. This glass here is green, and these cars are bright colours. So by taking it to monochrome, it's reduced it to the shapes, and I think that works quite well, especially with the textures down the right-hand side and the reflections going on in there. And then you've got a feeder back into this side, so it's all pushing you into the image, into the cars, then up, and you see the lights and everything. And you sort of explore the image, which I think is useful. So again, portraiture. This is a couple of portraits I've taken. The one on the left-hand side happens to be my son. He's just about to undertake a very serious cycle race. I think it was in Doncaster, where he's going to get his backside whooped. and he knows it. By this time, he's just getting a little bit old for doing criterium racing. But I think it shows him off. And again, with portraiture, I think you can afford to get away with a gritty look again, so you can push the processing. You couldn't always as a lady, but most of the portraits I take tend to be gentlemen in this sort of situation. And certainly I would use that for sort of as an example for how to process a portrait in monochrome. One on the right-hand side is, oh yes, his name's gone now, but Derek Chatterton.
Oh, I'm going to say, I can't help you there. I'm sorry.
It's Derek Chatterton. And the reason I know that is he was a cycle dealer at the same time as motorcycle dealer at the same time as my father. They were both selling Yamaha, used to exchange spares. So I'd go down to his place and sort of see him occasionally there. And then that one's actually taken right across the other side of the paddock. But I took one of him and one of, the guy who's on the television a lot. It'll come to me. Anyway, the difference was, I'm over the other side of the paddock. Derek seems to have seen me. The other character, every time he looks round, he sees I'm taking a photograph, his head goes down. This one just stares you out. It was just completely different. But it was interesting to see that. Anyway, this is an interesting concept, the high key, going with the brightness around the outside. I know a lot of judges don't like white vignettes, but we'll forget about that. This is sort of like a white vignette, if you like. But if you've got a nice dark subject in the middle there, then the brightness around the outside is going to focus the attention just as much as putting a vignette around the corners and pushing the eye in. You certainly don't need any more to get you to surface on that. I think it's a walrus on the left-hand side. And that's taken at Dudley Zoo, that one. He's a big beastie. The one on the right-hand side, that's taken in Sorrento. And there was actually some electric work on the below it on theirs, but I've taken that out just to reduce it to the shutters. Quite often I say with this, sometimes I prefer this taken square on, but I think if you took that square on, you'd lose all the textures and the shapes, and I think that would spoil it. It is at least supportive of that mild shadow below it, which is from a very high sun time. And going the opposite way around to that is the low key, where you go with the blacks around the outside. And this is a couple of images here. The owl on the left side, I think, suits it. You can still see the feathers all the way around. And similarly with the tiger on the right-hand side, you can see all the detail there. But the backgrounds are actually quite cluttered. So doing this, it was better to go for low key than it was for high key. Not that you could have done in the situation, but it was an interesting experience. I think in both cases, the eyes become the dominant thing you see, and the nose. There's plenty of detail in both of those. Okay, so when you're shooting, monochrome, you've got to first of all make your mind up whether you're going to shoot RAW or JPEG. And depending which one you've chosen, you need to set your camera differently. Well, my opinion. If you shoot JPEG, don't ever shoot in monochrome, because once the conversion's been done in your camera, it's fixed. You can't change your mind. You're stuck with that version. My advice with shooting in JPEG is set it to a color mode like landscape or vivid color, which is going to boost the colors, and then go back and convert it when you get into your post-processing. If you shoot RAW, then what I would suggest you do is to actually shoot in monochrome, because when you do shoot in monochrome and RAW, the color information is still retained. In fact, when you import it into Lightroom, you'll probably see a color image rather than the monochrome image. The later versions of Lightroom do, I think, take into account the color settings that have been made, but you could override that in Lightroom and change it back to color, and then you can boost the colors you want and play about with those to change them to either lighter or darkened versions of whatever you wanted. And that is a much better way. So again, if you're shooting as a JPEG, shoot in color and change it afterwards. If you're shooting RAW, shoot in monochrome. The other thing you need to take into account is you're using a mirrored or a mirrorless camera. If you're using a mirrored camera, you can't see what the monochrome looks like until you look on your review screen. Perhaps you can if you're using the screen to as live view. I'm not quite sure about that one. I haven't tried that, to be quite honest with you. But if you're shooting mirrorless, as soon as you set your camera to monochrome, the viewfinder scene is monochrome and the rear screen shows monochrome, and you can actually see what's going on. Now, again, I wouldn't shoot in monochrome in JPEG with this combination. I'd still shoot RAW, because although I can see that it works in monochrome, I may not like the tones that it's creating from each color. I would probably want to change my mind when I processed it. So I'd still work from the color image and start and move the colors around to different tones. I must be honest with you, my camera's set to RAW and JPEG. I know it seems ridiculous, but I do like to shoot that way. Then quite often I will use JPEGs in an AV, and the RAWs will go for printing and so on. So I tend to shoot both.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm just the same as you, Brian, shooting both, and then you've got the option.
That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, on this occasion, I actually did go out to shoot RAW. Sorry, to shoot monochrome. So I'd got my camera set up. I think I'd gone out with a 28mm lens, a 40D Canon, and I was shooting at Clacton. I decided I was going to shoot monochrome, so I shot mostly graphic images. And if you look at the one in the top right-hand corner, that is the JPEG that came straight out of the camera. And below it, you've got the color image, which I've processed to push the colors a little bit. But then when you look at if you compare the processed mono on the bottom left compared to the in-camera JPEG on the right-hand side, you can see there's a huge difference. And I think you'll agree that the one in the bottom left is far superior to the one at the top right. So what we're going to do about the settings, I would set my white balance to be usual, auto white balance. I wouldn't mess about with that. I tend to shoot in evaluative or matrix, depending which one you have. I don't see any point in changing that because you're just trying to get the tone down there. You might wish to go into your pictures files and boost contrast a little bit. That's a possibility. It can help. Again, if you're shooting RAW, it'll only help you visualize it on the rear screen or in through your viewfinder. It won't affect the final image. It's also worth considering using a polarizer because that will sort of intensify the colors and help again, providing you've got enough light at first. Remember, the polarizer is going to knock a couple of stops off it. Some cameras, particularly my Canons, have in-camera filters. So I tend to set a red filter when I'm shooting monochrome, which is fairly traditional to boost contrast a bit. You've got the yellow probably as well. There's a whole series of colours in there, and it's worth setting those as well. Bearing in mind that it doesn't affect your final image, it's just allowing you to visualise what you're taking better and seeing if it's working. So here's if you look at this colour, the colours are across the top here, no filter. Down the right-hand side, left-hand side is where there's no filter at all. That's the actual shades they change from these colours down the left-hand side. If you then put a red filter in, notice that the red has now gone from very dark tones to very light tones, and the greens and blues have gone to blacks. So that's what it's creating. It's reducing the tonal range quite a bit. Orange, doing different things again, and the yellow. Yellow is used very good for skies, they say. Used to be traditional for monochrome film cameras. Put a yellow filter in. Greens for foliage, and blues to reduce the reds. So it was interesting. You could use all these, and I mean, they're all there within your camera if you look around, and it's worth trying to play about with them and see how they sort of work with you. If you're using silver effects, you can throw them into post-processing as well. It's one of the options at the bottom of silver effects. Here's another example. Again, I went out to shoot monochrome on this one. I got myself into a lot of bother because the wife was running up to the dress shop, and she wanted a colour, and I shot in monochrome. I didn't actually tell her just recently that I'd got the colour images as well. That didn't go down too well. Anyway, on the left-hand side, you've got the in-camera JPEG, and on the right-hand side, you've got the processed RAW. Now, for this one, I actually set a sepia tone in the camera. I also set a red filter. So that one on the left-hand side has got a red filter and sepia camera set in the camera, and that's the output. But notice on the right-hand side, you can get far more detail out of it by giving it that gritty tone. Again, if you've gone for, you wouldn't You might think you could get away with it by processing the JPEG, but you've always got to bear in mind that a JPEG has only got 8 bits of information, whereas your RAW file has got 14 to 16 bits of information. That gives you a lot more scope with tweaking it and moving the tones around. So, again, preferable to shoot RAW, in my opinion, all the time. I actually started shooting RAW long before I knew what the hell to do with it, which was actually a bonus, because now I do know what to do with it. I've been back to a lot of images to reprocess them. Okay, so monochrome conversions. Not all monochrome conversions are equal. That's the first thing you need to know. So I put a colour wheel in the bottom right-hand corner. And one of the traditional ways of doing it in Photoshop is to just do a grayscale conversion. And it's not a bad way of doing it. I think it works better than some of the other ways. But it's just a sort of cop-out for me. You're going to the basic settings and just putting it in there and leaving it. The other option was to do desaturation. But if you look at that, we've lost quite a lot of tone by doing desaturation. So grayscale would be preferable to desaturate it. But it's still not the best you can do. And then if you use black and white landscape, that's quite a nice one. That's giving some nice tones in there. I think that comes from Elements, that one. I think it's in Elements. So what I'm really saying is that if you use one of these things, you're not going to get the same results. If you choose to do a different conversion, the images are going to look completely different. So really get your image how you want it, then convert afterwards, and really spend some time over the conversion. Don't just go for the first one. Try these if they work. If these work up to a point, but you're not quite satisfied, use that as the basis of a conversion, and then start and tweak it beyond there in whatever software you're using. And again, only these conversions are only available to you if you shoot in color. It's worth bearing that in mind. In Silver FX Pro, it gives you even more options to play with. If you're going to go to use Silver FX Pro, I would find a conversion that seems to work for you as a basic, and then rely on tweaking the sliders on the right-hand side to improve it as you wish to see it rather than what it does. And you may find that it won't always work. So certain images you'll need a different. If you also on One Effects, I don't know. There's a free version of that going around. I don't mean as in a legal copy of One Effects. And there's some quite nice black and white conversions in there if you want to play about with different ideas.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Brian, isn't Silver Effects now owned by Google or something, and it's free? There is still the free version around, but this is Nick Effect. The free versions are there. You probably have to dig around to find them. If you haven't got them, I can sort of email a set across to somebody and you can distribute them with pleasure. They're still okay. They're now taken over by DxO, and I think they're on their 3rd generation of them, but they're charging big bucks having developed it. What they wanted was the point technology that came with the Nick Effects. Its ability, I don't know whether you play with Nick Effects, but if you point to an area, it puts a circle, and it sort of then uses some form of artificial intelligence to decide how much of that circle is going to be processed. And you can start and so if you wanted to do a technique on an image, you can say eliminate it from the sky by using a series of these filters, and then that will reduce it down to just affecting the areas you want it to affect. So putting a positive and negative filters in. It's very, very, very clever. Yeah. Graham from the club has just said that it was Google, now it's DxO.
Yeah.
So I mustn't say that word again because it wakes my phone up every time I say Google.
Right, this is I'm assuming not everybody's got the posh software, so I assume most people have got Elements. And if you're using Elements, I wouldn't use desaturate it, and I wouldn't use the grayscale. I would go into the monochrome conversion. I can't quite remember where it is. I think it's under Enhance up here. And that will bring up this go convert to black and white. And then you've got these options down here. It defaults to scenic landscape, which tends to work quite nicely. But by just clicking on each one of these, you'll get a different version of it, which you may appreciate more. So I'll just click through those and see which one works better. And then if you get one that's fairly close, you can just tweak the sliders on the right-hand side just a little bit. Don't go big on them because that will really screw things up. If you go big, you'll probably get black areas and horrible things. So just do little tweaks on them. If you look on the right-hand side on here, look, there's pluses down this side. Tend to use those and the minuses down this side rather than pulling the sliders. It can be just a bit too heavy if you're doing that. But that's quite good. I mean, I found some quite good conversions in there. So it's worth playing about with elements first of all. If that's what you've got, that's what you've got to work with. You can do it. It's not a problem. If you've got Photoshop, you've got in the camera raw settings, you've got the convert to black and white here, and you can slide up all these sliders here. Now these you can pull about, and that will, pulling it to the left will make the oranges darker, pulling it to the right will make the oranges brighter. And so you can pick up, say, this part of the bike here, and you can actually change that part of the bike by knowing what colour it is, just by dragging these sliders around. Or if you want to, I think there must be a targeting tool with Photoshop, but I don't tend to do this in Photoshop. I tend to do this in Lightroom. But I know in Lightroom there's a targeting tool, so you can just select the targeting tool, click on the area, and then either push it up to make it brighter and down to make it darker. And you can really work on an image very quickly. So Photoshop is very good with these sort of sliders. That's the default set there. That's what it throws in. It's varying everything to make the greys just that little bit different. Basically, I must be honest with you, it does a damn good job. So it's always worth starting from there. You can always then go back into the other features up here and apply some other stuff to go with it, some clarity and texture and things like that to tweak it a little bit. Be a little bit careful because remember that everything is going to get tweaked around here. So whenever you start doing anything heavy with subjects, like especially sharpening, use masking as well. I don't know whether you're familiar with the masking in Photoshop and Lightroom. It's worth bearing it down. If you sort of drag the masking slider to the right and hold the Alt key down, you'll see that a series of lines will appear around here, getting more and more tighter to the shape of the thing. And that's the only area then you're going to be sharpening. So it's edge sharpening, which is much more efficient than general sharpening, because general sharpening will just take all this area here and make it horrible and blotchy.
Yeah.
In Lightroom, this is the targeting tool on the right-hand side here. This little tool here, you click on that and it gives you a shape, which then allows you to pull these up and down. But if you look at these, those are the same images. And if you look at the darkness on this part of the fairing here, and then look in here, it's brighter. So obviously this has been tweaked a little bit different to the last one. So it's the same image.
I must admit, Brian, that curve on the colour sliders is just about the same on both of them, isn't it?
It's very similar. I think if you look there, there's some disturbance just here.
Ah, yes.
Just there.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the norm, shall we say.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what it is. I might have played, you can never tell. I just put these together as a quick look through, you know. So. And then we've got Silver Effects. Well, you've got your presets down the left-hand side in Silver Effects. And there's all sorts down there, that's all I can say. And then over down this side, this is only showing part of it. You've got global and selective adjustments. Now, global adjustments are going to affect every part of the image. And being honest with you, you don't want to do too much in the global area, just enough to make things look about right. You're much better off going into the selective thing here. This is a control point. If you click that and then hit it on this area here, if you've got a lot of structure on, which is sharpening and texture stuff, on this area, you can then use a control point here to remove it from this area here. And that will sort of save you sharpening skies and things and faces and add a texture to them where you don't want it. So this is the control point technology I'm talking about. Notice here's the core filters I mentioned earlier on, and then they've got film types, all sorts of things down there. it's a very comprehensive place to play, shall I say. But once you come up with an idea, I would sort of save it as a recipe and then sort of adjust it as and when you go along, when it doesn't seem to work with the image you're working with. Just a quick bit on printing, and I think we're about ready for a break. I put this up because really this is what it's all about, dot matrix printing. And here you can just see that we've got tones of grey and going to dark. Now, the dot matrix printer, remember, all you had was a black or a non-point, didn't you, basically? So getting this was quite difficult. You used symbols which didn't have many dots in them to make them lighter and so on. So that's a very old printer, but it's just to give you the idea of how these prints are made up. Now, bear in mind how a printer works. It's what they call a subtractive color space. When we look at a screen, it's an additive color space, and we add red, green, and blue. Sorry, red, green, and blue. This is slightly different. We get white. Get that right way? No, screen, going from black to white. On paper, we're going from white to black, so we're actually a subtractive color. We're taking all the color away from it. So it's important to know how your printer works. Now, the thing about color is, in the old days, you would probably have 3 colors, and if you were lucky, you had a black. And that would help make better monochrome pictures, because using the color problems tends to give you a bit of a color cast, which you then have to work out how the hell to remove. And there was lots of programs on the internet about how to do it, but it was very, very complicated. And I was pleased when printers came along. So the modern printer, you tend to have a multicolor and a black at a minimum. And this one here is Canon from that one. This one is the Canon Pro. But if you look here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grey colors there. And that gives you the ability to go from light grey through to a really matte black or a photo black. And that allows you 4 different gradations of black from those cartridges. So you've got the absence of colour altogether, which gives you the white of the paper. And do also remember that your paper matters, because it's nice to have. You can have a soft paper which will look slightly creamy, or you can have a very hard paper which will look white. And some will suit some printers, some images, and some will suit others. So be a little bit careful that your white is not necessarily got to be a real white. Then you come through to applying these. So you're applying these in different places, and it gives you a much smoother gradation. It gives you far more than you could any other way. Technically speaking, with this one here, you've only got 256 shades of grey. By having all these different ones here, it extends that hugely and gives you a much better print. The Pro 1 gives superb black and white print, I must be honest. I've got one now. I've had it for a few years now. Just after the first came out, I got one, and it really is incredible. When I read the write-up, there's very few events that have superseded it since, so it's certainly a bonus. Okay, so we're getting close to about tea time, I think. So a little bit more there about printers, but I think I've covered most of that. And that's sort of summation of what we've been doing, and I think that's probably about it. How are we doing for that, Graham? Is that just about right?
That's perfectly all right. Yes, I'll just switch myself on in the bottom corner there so that people can see me. So we did have someone else just join us just at the end there, but we're not at the end, of course. We're only just going to go for a 15-minute break. So we're now at 7:50. So if we could be back for about 7 o'clock, and then we'll look to start again at about 5 past, somewhere around 5 past. So Brian and I will be back on for just after 7, and we'll start somewhere between 5 past and 10 past. So I'll say cheerio for now to the members, and we shall see you all in 15 minutes. Cheers for now. Right, so